Why did Jesus wait 2 days? This was something that was driving me crazy when I was rereading this in the last couple of months, actually completely unrelated to getting to prepare for this. And so, like any normal person would do in prayer, I immediately got out my notebook and started logging the days and figuring out exactly how this would work. So I think I want to go into that and give that practical answer. But I think that there's something deeper going on here of also why is this gospel so long, right? Because I feel like especially in Lent right now, these gospels just seem to be getting longer and longer. And I remember as a kid standing next to my mom when the gospel would happen, she would have a little book with all the readings, and I would flip to the gospel, and I was used to reading like a little page, right? Maybe like one turn of the page, but then Lent would roll around, and I have to turn page after page to get through all of the gospel. And don't even get me started on Palm Sunday when we read the whole Passion, and it'd be there for minutes on end. But I think in this gospel in particular, there's something a little bit deeper that's going on and why we need the longer version of this story. And then it's actually not just about creating this dramatic build up to the resurrection of Lazarus at the end, but in this process is actually revealing something to us about the heart of God. So, kind of what's the context of this story today? Well, this is actually occurring near the end of the Gospel of John, even though we're only at chapter 11. This is kind of the end of Jesus's public ministry. Now, at this point, he's kind of caused a lot of trouble in the people who are around him. He has been in Jerusalem. He has healed twice on the Sabbath. And that is part of what they're referencing when they were saying that they were trying to stone him when he was last in Jerusalem. He has created religious unrest, political unrest. He is upturning the norms of society, both religiously and politically, and he's starting to get some heat for it. And so I can't help but wonder that perhaps some of the disciples were saying, hey, Jesus, let's just go into the countryside. We're going to be by the Jordan River. We're going to lay low for a little bit, let kind of all this craziness die down. And then maybe after all of that, we can get back to this program of taking back the kingdom and kind of establishing this earthly kingdom that we had hoped for. And so Jesus is there. And then at this time, somebody comes up to him and says, your friend Lazarus is dying. Now, especially in the Gospel of John, there is a lot of context for the deep love that Jesus has for Lazarus. And especially if you go to daily Mass during Holy Week, I think it's Monday or Tuesday, there's the reading that happens just after this, the Gospel, where Jesus is there having dinner with Martha and Mary and Lazarus. And I think, unlike so many other stories that happen at this point of the Gospel, it's just a time where Jesus goes and is present with people. It seems like it's a place that he was just safe, almost like a second home or a chosen family. So, knowing all of that, why then would Jesus go on and wait 2 days? And so this is where I got out my notebook and my calendar here. So if we started saying, okay, somebody comes to Jesus, and that's day one, your friend Lazarus is ill. Jesus waits 2 days. And from where Jesus was, kind of near the Jordan River, to Bethany, was at most a day's journey, something like 15 to 30 miles, maybe a long day, but certainly something that potentially could have been done in half a day. So if we say, Jesus found out Lazarus is ill, that's day one. He waits 2 days, that's day two. And day three, finally, Jesus travels with the disciples, that's day four. But we find out when Jesus arrives that Lazarus has already been dead for 4 days. So more likely than not, when Jesus found out Lazarus was ill, that was probably the day that Lazarus actually had passed away. Perhaps Jesus had some knowing of this, and the reason why he waited was for his own mourning and the loss of his friend. Perhaps some of this was giving space for the disciples to take time to come to terms with the fact that they were going back to Jerusalem, to the lion's den, as it were, where Jesus was risking violence and even his own death. But if we move on in this story, Jesus really drags this out, right? He goes and talks with Martha. He speaks with Mary. And I compare this to like another time where there was somebody who was ill and had seemingly passed away. It is the daughter of someone. It's in a different gospel, but they come to Jesus, hey, my daughter is ill. Similarly, he is delayed on his journey as he heals someone else to go heal this person's daughter. But when he gets there, similarly, there's people who are mourning outside the home, but Jesus tells them all to say, it's okay. She's merely asleep. He goes up to the room where she is. Again, people are mourning. He tells them, do not weep. She's healed and everything is normal. But we see in the story of Martha and Mary they both have what I think is an extremely vulnerable question here, or statement, when they say, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. And I think sometimes when it comes to reading the Gospels and knowing how they have been stories handed down for generations and translated, I think some of that raw human emotion gets lost in the telling of this. Because when I imagine this story, when I read that line, I feel this immense weight, this grief, and honestly, this anger that must have been behind that. Because Martha and Mary both say this exact same thing. I can't help but think the debates they had, the discussions they had, the anger that was expressed kind of before Jesus even got there, as they were waiting anxiously, saying, "We know that we sent that messenger. The messenger is back. Why isn't Jesus here yet? He was only a day's journey away." And I think that this, more than just expressing their anger, is also a model for how we can be honest with God. I remember at one point in my life, I was just, nothing was going right. Everything was going wrong. And part of it was I was a college student. And so, right, everything is dramatic and difficult at that time. But I remember talking with my spiritual director and was venting for I don't know how many minutes as we were meeting for an hour. And finally, he paused and he said, Justin, you've told all this to me, but have you told this to God yet? And I said, no, I don't think God can handle me saying this. I'm supposed to be respectful, right? And he goes, sure, but like God created the whole universe, right? Jesus has suffered and died. Like I think Jesus can handle your anger. And so I remember a little bit later that day going into my car because I had roommates at the time and just driving around and just speaking with absolute honesty and then completely unfiltered to God. Because I think in that moment, it was an act of vulnerability. It was an opportunity to share with God the depths of my heart and what was actually going on. And even though there was anger, there was hurt, there was the frustration that was going on there was also a chance for Jesus to then speak into that. And I think in the same way, Martha and Mary, in expressing their anger and their frustration, also didn't do it as a way to push away Jesus, but to give Jesus an opportunity to speak and to act. And this was kind of expanded into what everybody else was experiencing there, right? We think about the healings that Jesus has done at this time. He has healed strangers. He's healed political enemies. He's healed, people who were considered heretics by people of the day. He has healed all these different people that he doesn't even know. And yet when it comes to somebody that he loved, this is the person that he chooses not to heal, right? People are asking, could not the one who opened the eyes of the blind man do something so that this man would not have died? And I can't help but think how often I ask this question, how often we ask this question of, with everything else going on in the world, why hasn't God done something? God, who we believe is all powerful, supposedly all knowing, why doesn't God act? And I think the answer is in what Jesus does next. He sees all of this and he's troubled. It talks about how Jesus is deeply, deeply troubled in the Greek. And then he goes to the tomb. Because I think in this story, John isn't depicting, or the gospel writer is not depicting Jesus as sort of this magical fairy that comes in and makes everything right. John is depicting depicting Jesus as one who joins with our suffering every step of the way. That God is not here to kind of be that genie that fixes everything, but is one who takes time to weep and to mourn. Who takes time to listen to the needs, the anger, the frustrations of our heart. Who understands the need of loss and mourning and grief. That we have a God who desires to be one with us in all things, who knows that the world is not how it's supposed to be, who is working to make it right, but also knows that in that there needs to be pauses for when things are not right. And so I think part of the reason why we need a long version of the gospel, why we need this drawn out version, and why Jesus couldn't just waltz in and heal Lazarus, is because we need this full picture of who God is, that God is with us. And that for us in our own work, that yes, we should be working for healing and justice and equality and restoration, that is the ultimate goal and end of this story. But we also need to take time with others, that we are not called to always try and fix everything first, but we also are called to sit with others and enter into their sufferings as well.